1. As Mr. Arnold from Jurassic Park, aka Samuel L. Jackson, would say, hold on to your butts. This is a wild one, and it happened about a week ago. It's a little backstory. I used to work at Wonkamart way back in 2015. I was the entertainment manager and had to visit the CX desk for returns almost daily. It sucked. So my grandmother is elderly, 73 years old, and she could kick my butt. And gets flustered easily, so I offered to help assist her to her monthly Wonkamart here in town to get basics: TP, paper towels, some specialty foods that remind her of growing up in Okinawa, important later, etc. We're walking down the ethnic food aisle, me recommending a Japanese curry and sides for it. Put in the buggy when, lo and behold, I hear a very loud ahem behind me. I ignore it for a bit, checking my phone for the grocery list. It's at this point I feel the deep dawning panic in my arthritic shoulder that an entitled bitch has embedded her nails. Putting so much pressure I almost collapsed from the pain. Oh, you're faking it. Get up like a good boy and help me. I saw you helping that old woman, so you obviously work here. Ma'am. Don't even use the excuse you don't work here. I saw you helping that old bat. Ma'am, what am I wearing? Does it look like a Wonka uniform? Or are you confused that I'm wearing a security badge for my own company? How daft are you? I'm so gonna get you fired, you ungrateful. Insert multiple racial slurs about Asians and Hispanics here. I'm tri-racial, by the way. I'm like Christmas for racists. A clueless manager happens upon us and asks, what's going on here? Is everything okay? Now, this insert more racial slurs here attacked me for no reason. I want him arrested now. I'm calling the police. She sneered at me like she had won. Do you have anything to say elsewise? I'm going to let the cameras show their side. That's enough evidence for me. About this time, I was being directed to the security office in cuffs. I kept my mouth shut, however. My grandma then asked, "Can someone explain why my grandson who's helping me shop is suddenly being locked doors?" Trust me, there was a lot of profanity used. The store manager then said, "Do you understand the consequences before you? For what, helping my grandmother shop and trying to tell that woman that I don't work here?" "Well, she says you assaulted her. Anything to say about that?" "I'm sorry, are you that daft? Am I wearing a vest with a logo on the back? Do I have Telzon palm in my hand? What on earth makes you think I work here? I left in 2015 after I set up every IT component in the entire store. Don't believe me, call this number." About half an hour later, the police arrived. I smiled and said, "Hey, John, busy night. Don't uncuff me just yet." Our star has a confused Pikachu face. The store manager adds, "I'm sorry, OP, your director said you did this store in record time. He's still perplexed how you didn't overload the server." Another half hour. My wrists were hurting since I put too much pressure. The guy did an amazing job to double lock them. The sergeant, my friend, helped me on my feet. The EB with her smug face looked so proud. "Well, after the evidence," said the store manager, "was reviewed and multiple calls to certify OP was and is innocent, Sergeant, could you please take the cuffs off?" "I already know what you're going to say next." "Do you know who I am? I will sue every one of you. You will regret this." Ma'am, you called him multiple racial slurs and had no remorse. I really hope you have a good attorney because those cameras capture audio. Never heard from her again. I declined a coupon and said, "I want you to give that coupon to a mother trying to get eggs and maybe milk to her children. The simplest acts of kindness spread ripples. Next step is convince the store manager, a college buddy, to let me handcuff him and allow a soft pie throwing contest to raise funds for charity." 2. Growing up, I didn't necessarily have the best template in regards to romantic relationships. My then 19-year-old dad decided he was going to take a trip to pick up milk with my 17-year-old babysitter, never to be seen again. My mom drifted in and out of relationships trying to find the one. My aunt, a woman who, mind you, is thrice divorced, was the kind of woman that blamed men for everything and still does to this day. God love my mom for trying to do her best and eventually meeting the man that would be my stepdad much later on in life. But being around scenarios like this, especially during my adolescence, affected me as an adult. This much is certain. I didn't start dating until I was in my 20s. Didn't even lose my virginity until I was 22. I'd honestly spent so much time watching my mom go through unnecessary BS and listening to my aunt drunkenly screech about how anybody with an XY chromosome combination was a lecherous demon whose sole purpose was to destroy the opposite sex. Hellfreezer's note, who blabbed? On with the story. From the time I was 6. Well, kind of put me off the idea of sharing my life with anybody. That is until I met Mackenzie. When I met her, I was working at a livestock supply store. Think Tractor Supply, but much smaller. We carried a good portion of the stuff you would need around your farm if you were raising, say, chickens, pigs, or cows. The family that owned the place were rather laid back, and occasionally would allow me to bring my dog to work with me. Roxy was a mutt, but one that was rather big for her age. She was a mix between boxer and bull mastiff, and at just barely 2, still very much a puppy. Despite her size, she was gentle as a lamb, and this particular day I brought her along with me. I wasn't going to be working a long shift. We had one of our suppliers dropping off alfalfa bales, as well as live rabbits. If I'm remembering correctly, these rabbits were the large Flemish variety that are, as much as I hate to say it, usually raised for meat. Still, we would have the occasional person come in so they could get a look at them and maybe purchase 1 or 2 as pets. Roxy was laying by what was essentially a large plastic octagonal-shaped child gate with newspaper on the floor, and with those innocent puppy dog eyes she watched the rabbits hop around and play. They were in absolutely no danger whatsoever. If anything, they were the most protected rabbits in the state at the time. Roxy would occasionally let out a grunt or groan with her stubby little tail wagging. Once or twice I'd have to tell her not to paw at the enclosure, but none of us were concerned. I'm getting ready to grab one of the last couple of pallets from the back in order to help stock it, when I hear this harmonious female voice say, "Excuse me, I've heard y'all were supposed to get your rabbits in today. I want to grab a couple for my little cousin's birthday if that's possible." I turn around to see for the first time. Long, crimped blonde hair, fair-skinned with freckles, hazel eyes, wearing a Garth Brooks t-shirt, cut-off shorts, and a pair of brown cowgirl boots. She smiles at me and has the smallest gap between her front teeth, and even though most people would find it a reason to laugh, as far as I was concerned, it added to her cute factor. Sure, I stammered while trying to form a coherent sentence. She could sense my nervousness. She laughed a little bit and gave me this coy little smile complete with dimples. I'm standing there and absolutely struggling to speak when finally my girl Roxy senses my nervousness and joins me at my side while she buries her head into my hip. "Oh wow, where did that tank come from?" Mackenzie asked, with a look of trepidation on her face. I scratched Roxy between her ear and got down on one knee next to her, giving her a full rub-down on her sides, while telling her she was a good girl. "This tank is my baby girl. Her name is Roxy. It's okay, she's harmless. Big as an ox, but gentle as a calf." What happened next was something I should have seen as a red flag. I was only 22 and completely inexperienced, not to mention young, dumb, and full of, well, you know the rest. As I'm standing up, Mackenzie extends her hand and clicks her teeth at Roxy, trying to coax her over to her side in order to give her a few pets. Normally, Roxy would jump at this opportunity, and sometimes quite literally. That was something that I was working on rather hard at the time. Excitable pups, no matter the size, have a tendency to jump. So I'm fully expecting her to wag that stub and excitedly rush over to the person who wanted to pet her. But in the first and, to the best of my memory, only time, Roxy stood behind me with her tail tucked and put her head between my legs, looking at Mackenzie, let out a low baroo accompanied with a bit of whining. I comforted my dog and told her to go lay down. She listens to me, and I apologize because she had never acted that way before. Mackenzie tells me not to worry about it, chalks it up to the fact that my dog probably smells her ferret, and we left it at that. So I walk with her to the corner of the store where we keep the rabbits, and we fish through both pens. We had the rabbits separated by gender, and she ended up picking up this incredibly cuddly sweet female. This little thing just melted into her arms while she picked it up, and she knew her cousin would love it. The rest of the interaction was as any other would. An exchange of money, have a nice day, and a friendly wave of goodbye as she walked out the door. I turned my attention back to Roxy as she was laying in the doghouse we had on display. "What got into you, girl?" I asked with a tone of genuine concern. Don't get me wrong, I knew she couldn't really answer me, but I've never seen her act that way before. My concern was short-lived because not 20 minutes later my best friend Travis came in and immediately started looking for his little niece, squeaky toy in hand. She darted with a full head of steam in his direction the moment she heard his voice. I'm expecting her to knock him over. Instead, she barrel rolls and goes belly up. He leans down and scratches her belly, and then gives her the squeaky toy, which she gently takes back to the doghouse before laying down with it and squeaking it for half an hour. I proceeded to tell him about the girl that had come in, and that's how I learned her name. "Oh yeah, that's Mackenzie Mitchell." Last name obviously changed for the sake of story. Her dad owns a plumbing supply place up the road. She's cute, man. But I've heard she's a little on the crazy side, Travis stated. Crazy? How so? I responded. Don't worry, man, not like Fatal Attraction crazy. Like Coyote Ugly, get up on the bar and dance around crazy. You should ask her out, he said to me with a wink. And so my shift ended. Roxy and I went home, and the prospect of asking Mackenzie out rocked around on my spacious 22-year-old head. Okay, both of them. For the duration of the night. I mean, I had crushes when I was a teenager, but never really acted on them due to the aforementioned trauma. I figured it was now or never. I just had to wait for an opportunity to talk to her again. Well, opportunity knocks, as they say, and the next day at work I was shown I wouldn't have to wait too long. Mackenzie came in to thank me for helping her purchase the rabbit, and she told me how much her cousin loved her. I was over the moon to hear this news, and that provided the perfect segue for us to converse and get to know one another a bit more. Her timing could not have been any better, because I was getting ready to go on lunch break. If I'm being honest, I fully expected her to shut me down. I've never been the most good-looking guy. If anything, I'm just below average. I'm 5'5" and in better shape than I was at the time, but then I was just a bit over 300 pounds. I used to refer to myself as a chud any time I looked at myself in the mirror, and my self-esteem was non-existent. I've been laughed at after working up the courage to ask out a girl on several occasions, and I was bracing myself. So you can imagine my surprise when she said, "Absolutely, you seem like a nice guy. Maybe we can hit the movies this weekend." So we had a day and location set, and I was beside myself with glee. I went back to work after we exchanged phone numbers, and the rest of the day went by in the happiest blur I have ever experienced. I got home and resisted the urge to call her right away. It was the damnedest thing. I was home maybe 45 minutes and cooking myself up a can of beef stew for dinner. I sit down to watch some Comedy Central, and as I'm getting a little bit into what I seem to remember being a rerun of home movies, my phone rings. Is Mackenzie on the other line? She begins telling me how much she can't wait for us to go to the movies and wants to know if I'm okay with horror and sci-fi films. Even though they weren't really my bag, so to speak. I'm more of a crime drama, thriller, and spoof comedy guy. I tell her yes. I asked her what movie she had in mind, and she suggests we go see Alien vs. Predator. I say sure, and we continue talking for another couple of hours, just getting to know each other a bit better over the phone. So date night rolls around, and we're sitting through what was quite possibly the worst Alien and Predator movie ever made. 2018 hadn't happened yet, and I'd like to say we were maybe an hour in or less before she can see that I'm not enjoying the film, and she asks me if we can leave. I nodded in agreement, and upon doing so we promptly got up from our seats and exited the theater. "So what would you like to do now that the movie is a bust?" I ask her with a half-serious tone. She puts an arm on my shoulder and suggests we go back to my place with a wink. That's exactly what happened, and I don't need to go into too much detail as to what happened after that. The next morning, she's taking a shower, and I get up to let Roxy out. I open my bedroom door, and she's standing there, doing the universal "hurry up, I've got to go" doggy dance. But then Mackenzie starts singing in the shower, and Roxy completely forgets she's got to pee. She starts barking at the door to indicate stranger danger, but as soon as I tell her to calm down, she listens. I let her out through my sliding glass door and watch to make sure she's done her business. She finishes up and comes up to the back porch, waiting to get in. But then Mackenzie comes out to the kitchen looking for a cup of coffee, and my dog is just staring daggers at her. No growling this time, no baring of teeth, just kind of cautiously staring at her. Mackenzie is sipping on her mug of black coffee when she makes eye contact with Roxy. Roxy kind of gives her this look as if she's saying, "How you doing?" And she walks off to the back porch, but keeps looking through the door, through the rails. Mackenzie laughs because she thinks this is cute, and all the while I'm ignoring what is essentially a used car dealership full of red flags. I didn't tell her at the time, but Mackenzie was my first, and I was still experiencing the afterglow. She finished up her cup of coffee and gave me a kiss on the cheek before thanking me for a great night and going about her way. The rest of the day went great. I was off work, took Roxy out to the dog park, had a great time, and even took Travis along so he could give his husky some exercise. We were watching our dogs have the time of their lives. The two of them were best friends, and as we're watching our girls play all rough and tumble, I thank him for telling me to take a chance on Mackenzie. I don't kiss and tell, but I tell him we had a great date despite the crappy movie. By the look he gave me, I knew he could tell why the date was so great without me having to say anything. He just gave me a fist bump and told me he was proud of me for taking a chance. I wish I could have lived that day on repeat for a while like Bill Murray without all the cynicism. But that's not how things work. She and I dated for around 7 months. At first, everything was great. We have 2 dates a week on average, and we go everywhere from restaurants in the area to museums out of the area, and we truly enjoy each other's company. Around 3 months in, she tells me her roommate flaked on the rent, and she's going to be forced to live with her mom and dad again. I wasn't having it. Though my 2-bedroom double-wide wasn't the largest accommodation, I owned it, and I had no problem with her moving in. The day before she moves in, I got a tearful phone call from her. She tells me her ferret passed away. She tells me that she knows she has to finish packing up, but she just had to bury her old body, and she doesn't have the energy to do so. I pull myself up by the bootstraps, head over to her place, help her finish packing, load up the moving van, drive over with her in tow, and unload everything without an ounce of help from her. At the time, I wasn't angry. I understood she was quite upset, and grief has a way of affecting people. But not even 2 weeks after moving in, she starts instituting rules, because now we're an official couple and we need to have them. Again, young and inexperienced, didn't see this red flag waved in front of my face, so I agreed. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, 50-50 on groceries and utilities. Make sure we plan our date nights in advance if we decide we're going to go out, and on days where it's just supposed to be us, no friends. No problem, I think to myself, but as time goes on, I realize no friends means no friends. I only had a few that I considered close enough to spend an extended period of time with, and more often than not it was Travis. But gone were the nights where we would get together and shoot pool, gone were the impromptu fishing trips. If I tried to make plans that didn't constantly involve her, it usually resulted in an argument. And 7 months in, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat down at the kitchen table one night in order to have the talk. I wasn't going to outright kick her out because I wanted to make sure she had a place to go. Knowing full well that she had the option to move back in with her parents, I figured that would be the action she took. But damn, I was wrong. She doesn't take the news well. As a matter of fact, she completely loses it and reaches into the fridge before throwing a sealed can of Coors Light at my head. I dodged it as it hits my tile kitchen floor and explodes like a pressurized beer grenade. She comes at me like she's going to do some actual damage, and Roxy runs and stands between my legs again, looking up at her with a snarl on her face. This is enough to make Mackenzie grab an armload of stuff and walk out the door, before getting into her vehicle and leaving. In retrospect, I know I should have called the cops, but I live in an area where the cops would see a 5'5" adult male trying to tell them he was accosted by a woman that was 5'2", at best, and they would just laugh it off. I'd like to say that mentality has changed. It has, ever so slightly, but it still exists. I just locked the deadbolt, took Roxy into my room, and locked my door in case Mackenzie came back. The shock of the situation wore off in a matter of minutes, and I found myself a blubbering mess, laying in the fetal position on my bed, with my ever-so-faithful companion curled up next to me, licking tears off my face. The next morning went by like any other. The morning routine of letting my dog out to do her business while I got ready for work went like it normally had. The only exception being that I was not doing great mentally, and I was dragging my butt. By the time I finally finished taking my shower and getting dressed, I had 10 minutes to get to a job that was 20 minutes away. So I rushed out the door and left Roxy in the backyard. I figured I can come back in my lunch break and let her in because it wasn't the first time I had done that. So I told my boss about what happened the previous night, and if Mackenzie happens to come in looking for me, to think of an excuse in order to get her to be anywhere but there. She agrees with me and tells me she had no problem considering she threw a beer can at me. Even she asked me why I hadn't called the police, but when I explained my line of reasoning, she actually agreed with me and told me maybe it was for the best. Lunch break rolls around. I get home and open that sliding glass door, but when I call for Roxy, I get no response. I run into the backyard looking for her, and she's nowhere to be found. I'm frantic as I'm running around my backyard looking for loose fence posts, or any way she could have gotten out, and then I notice my gate swinging in the wind. The thing is, I had it padlocked, and the only time I ever opened it was when I had to mow the lawn. It wasn't unlocked when I left. I go around the front of the gate, and I find the lock laying on the ground, still attached to its base, with the base bent in several different directions, as if somebody pulled it off with a claw hammer. I whip out my cell phone, call my boss, and explain the situation. He tells me to take all the time I need to try and find my dog and to go and ask my neighbors. Thankful she offered up that bit of clarity, I proceeded to do so. And when I get to the house across the street, my neighbor tells me he saw Mackenzie, and who he thought was a relative of hers, loading my dog into the back of their Jeep. He stepped out to ask her what was going on, and she said the dog had a veterinary appointment, and that I couldn't get off work. He didn't see anything. It made sense to him, as a matter of fact, so didn't question anything. I raced back to my car and hopped onto the driver's seat. I didn't know where Mackenzie's parents lived, but I knew where her dad worked, so I made my way over to that plumbing supply place in order to ask him if he had seen her. I explained the situation to him once I got to the store, and he tells me something that I should have been aware of long ago. But Mackenzie stayed absolutely mum about the whole scenario. They disowned her the night she moved in. I tell her dad she was telling me she was upset because her ferret died. He tells me she never had one, and for the most part she didn't like animals. He even advises me to call around the veterinarians in the area and try to get down to the bottom of things because they hadn't heard from her in months. The vet offices had not seen my dog, but our veterinarian reminded me that I had done the smart thing and gotten her microchipped. They told me that they would put a note in her file, and hopefully somebody would scan that microchip and realize the dog had been stolen. 5 long agonizing months go by. I'm coming home to an empty home. I can't sleep. My best friend is missing because my ex-girlfriend decided that stealing her would be an act of, retribution? I'm making peace with the idea that I may never see my dog again. Travis is feeling guilty as all get out because he advised me to ask this absolutely wicked bog witch out in the first place. He harbors no resentment or ill will towards me because he finally understood what was going on, and he did his best to try and find Roxy. Because at the end of the day, that's what best friends do. Every animal rescue in tri-state area had been contacted, the situation explained over and over. I even had my veterinarian make a few phone calls for me just to be on the safe side. Not a single person told me a dog matching Roxy's description had come through their rescue, and that was it. I resigned to the fact that my dog was truly gone. It was a rough night, the night I finally made up my mind. I was positively sick with grief and rage. I would periodically check in with Mackenzie's father and let him know what was going on, and even he felt bad for me. He eventually told me the reason he and his wife disowned their daughter was because of the fact she was caught stealing and pawning jewelry from her previous roommate. The thing is, she didn't have a drinking problem or a drug problem, yet she was a party girl, but only at parties. Those didn't come around often, so she decided to make herself the life of those events whenever she had the chance to attend one. But one thing I immediately noticed was that she had expensive tastes. Her clothes, her shoes, hell, even the soda she drank had to be name brand. She wouldn't settle for anything less. I saw it as a quirk, but as her father explained, she blew through her college fund right out of high school because she had to have a Volkswagen Jetta. When the Jetta inevitably crapped out on her, she had to have a Jeep. If the Jeep were any older than 5 years old, it wouldn't work for her. She got the most expensive one on the lot and ended up saddled with outrageous car payments. Her parents ended up kicking her out when they found out the news because they figured a rude awakening and some tough love was what it would take to finally start acting like an adult. It turns out she just drifted from one place to another until her goodwill was exhausted. I wasn't the first person she had done this to. And it hurt for me to find this out. It was a tough conversation. I needed to hear at the time. I just went home after that and attempted to relax with some McDonald's and Mel Brooks. I'm forcing myself to laugh as I'm watching Blazing Saddles for the umpteenth time when my phone rings. My caller ID indicates it's a number from Arizona. Fully expecting it to be a telemarketer, I answer it because I figure maybe screwing with somebody will make me feel a bit better. But when I answer the call, I'm greeted by a lady by the name of Catherine, and she tells me she's with an animal rescue in Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff is at least an 18-hour drive for me. She tells me they found my dog after checking her microchip. The veterinary file came up, and they could see she had been stolen. They told me they were relieved I answered my phone because my dog, although still alive, was in pretty bad shape. They found her at a notorious dump site along the interstate. 2 other dogs were protecting her. The truck driver spotted them while he was en route. Animal Control picked up all 3 dogs and took them over to the rescue where they were able to determine my Roxy had either been attacked by another dog, possibly coyotes, or even hit by a car. But her back leg had a massive gouge on it that had been festering for a while and was so damaged that it had to be removed after a round of antibiotics. I asked them what her prognosis was. Thankfully, they told me despite everything, she seemed to be on the mend. We talked for a while and I explained the distance between the rescue and myself, and the woman in charge told me she had no problem with making a road trip with her husband and my dog in order to see she made her way back home. I didn't have much, but I insisted on paying what I could towards her medical bill, but they kept telling me no because my dog was stolen from me. I asked them if they were funded by another organization. They told me they were independently funded. So I wasn't taking no for an answer. At least I thought I wasn't. We figured giving her a couple of weeks to heal up was a good idea, and after doing so, she and her husband made that long journey to my house. When I saw my baby leave that van, missing her back leg, I was overcome with a mixture of emotions. I was relieved my dog was finally back home. I was so damn angry she got injured as badly as she did. I was thankful these kind people went out of their way to reunite me with my now 3-legged fur baby. They came inside with me, and we had a super long conversation about how everything happened, and they agreed Mackenzie did this out of spite. They even suggested there was a chance she sold her to somebody, as a bait dog, given her sweet disposition. Considering the other 2 dogs that were protecting her were equally beaten up and emaciated pit bulls, that was entirely within the realm of possibility. Once again, I offered to pay them, and they told me no. But at the very least, they accepted my offer to go ahead and use my guest room in order to get a little sleep before hitting the road again. I knew I wouldn't feel right if I hadn't done something to compensate them, even in the smallest amount, for everything they had done for me, so as they slept, I walked up to the husband's jacket. I found he had a pocket that zipped on the inside of the jacket, and I rolled up $650, placed it inside, and I zipped it up, acting as if nothing happened. I gave the two of them the biggest hug I've possibly given anybody, and thanked them for everything. So to Wayne and Catherine, you two are absolute angels. We need more people like you in the world. And I can say not a day went by during the remainder of Roxy's life where I didn't thank you at least once. And to Mackenzie, you were manipulative, two-faced, and absolutely soulless. To this day, I curse the ground you walk on. Not only did you steal my dog, your positively heartless action resulted in my dog losing a limb. It very well could have been her life. I don't know what world you live in, but I'm honestly glad you're no longer part of mine. Now, I understand why your parents disowned you, and I can honestly say it couldn't have happened to a nicer person. And though it's been over a decade since all of this went down, you gave me severe trust issues that took forever for me to work through. That being said, I'm in a much better place than you will hopefully ever be. I'm married to a wonderful woman. She was there for me after Roxy eventually passed away. Her boy, Bosco, a Belgian Malinois, decided to bring me his tennis ball when I was sitting at the dog park trying to work through her passing. We've been married 4 years now. I'm happier than I've ever been. But if you're anything like you were all that time ago, I hope you're wallowing in your own self-made misery mire. 3. I'm going to start by letting everybody know it's been a rough 18 months. Last year, my sister's cancer came back aggressively after going into remission for a while. 8 months ago, she lost her fight. It's been hard. My sister and I were like Velcro growing up. I mean, sure, occasionally we fought like cats and dogs because siblings, but we were what most would refer to as Irish twins, and due to the incredibly small age difference, we shared many of the same interests. She was also quite protective of me, which I find funny because she stood at best 5'3", but you know what they say, ain't the size of the dog in the fight. And that's the thing, she was one hell of a fighter. It angers me that she beat cancer twice, mind you, 2 different forms, only for that second form to come back with so much of a vengeance. A couple of days ago, I was going through a storage unit that I'm currently emptying out, so it's one less bill to pay. Also, the weather is still relatively nice where I live, and I figured I can go ahead and have a bit of a yard sale. As I'm going through boxes and plastic totes, I came across one that I completely forgot I stored away in a back corner. Because I'm certain you're wondering about the contents, let me tell you. It was a bunch of photo albums, decades worth of photos featuring old friends, relatives who've long since passed, and finally, in a Hot Topic purchased nightmare before Christmas photo album, photos of my sister and I during our awkward teenage years and early 20s. I'm looking through these pictures feeling a mixture of sadness, nostalgia, and joy, when I get to a picture close to the back of the photo album. It's my sister and I standing in front of a tour bus. In the picture with us, trying to outdo our goofy faces, are Ville Valo, Daniel Lioneye, Midge, and crossing his eyes and sticking his tongue out at us from the bus window, Gas Lipstick, the lead vocalist, lead guitarist, bass player, and drummer, respectively, from the band Him. I start flashing back to the events leading up to what is quite possibly one of the happiest memories of my young adult life. And how it almost didn't come to be as such. Back in 2007, the band was on tour promoting their album Venus Doom. My sister and I were diehard fans of bands like the 69 Eyes, In Flames, and Him, due to our mutual enjoyment of the show Viva la Bam. Shortly before I found out through a radio advertisement that the band was coming through our town, my sister's cancer had gone into remission for a second time. So I figured what better way to celebrate. I was able to purchase tickets at the radio station or the venue itself, and seeing how I passed that radio station every single day on my way home from class, I stopped off and got us some tickets as close to the stage as possible. Do you want to talk about a hard time not spoiling the surprise? Oh God, then I want to drop those tickets in front of her with a giant smile, but I waited because our parents wanted to throw a little celebration of their own. Nothing special, a few close friends, some Chinese takeout, and a nice cheesecake from a local bakery, whose cheesecake is quite honestly a slice of heaven. I let my mom know about the tickets, and she had this great idea to wrap them in saran wrap and stick them under the cake. The cakes came pre-cut, so I didn't have to worry about the tickets being damaged by a knife or anything of the like. We polished off dinner, and even though we were feeling full, my mom encouraged my sister to have a second slice of cheesecake. When she lifted that slice up, she ended up dropping it on the floor when she saw those tickets. I still remember how giddy she was. She's sitting at the table crying tears of happiness because she wanted to go in the worst way, but by the time she went to get the tickets, they were already sold out. A hallmark moment, if ever there was one. That night we go to the show. It's a standing room only venue, and we're back in the third row. The two of us sing along to the point where our voices were absolutely hoarse by the end. But towards the end, we ran into a little problem. These two people end up cutting into our row, and then the two people standing next to us disappeared for a moment. I had no idea where they went. Maybe they went to grab merch, maybe they went to the bathroom, but all I know is in their place stands a woman with braided pigtails, a purple plaid Lolita skirt that left pretty much nothing to the imagination, and a black jackass skull and crutches t-shirt that had been cut to expose her midriff, black fishnet stockings, and black vinyl chunky boots. This woman was easily in her 50s, and her style screamed poser. Next to her stood a girl who was quite obviously related to her, perhaps a daughter or a niece. But she was her spitting image and dressed in incredibly short skin-tight black cut-off jeans, Doc Marten boots, and a skin-tight spaghetti-strap halter top with some sort of tribal tattoo artwork on it. This girl could not have been any older than 16, and I don't know why, but I got a kind of skeeved-out feeling around them. As politely as I could, given the fact that there was, well, a live band currently playing on a stage a little less than 100 feet away, I did my best to tell the woman that somebody was there. It took several tries for her to pick up on what I was saying, but when I did, she shot me a death glare and told me to F off. Her daughter, or whoever she's supposed to be, I didn't know at the time, is standing 2 inches from me and screaming into my ear. She actually screamed that she wanted to have the lead singer's babies, and her mother just went with it. Even laughed as if she was encouraging this behavior. The band is playing Sleepwalking Past Hope, one of, if not my favorite of their catalog, due to the Black Sabbath-esque breakdown towards the end of the song, leading towards one of Daniel's craziest guitar solos. But as I'm standing there anticipating the breakdown, as the music slows down and that all-too-familiar piano plays, as it's leading up to the moment I'm so desperately anticipating, the girl and her mother are repeatedly screaming, "Boring!" and yelling up requests for other songs as if they're talking to some radio DJ. It was sinking into. I could see Ville and Daniel with a look on their respective faces, as if they're trying to ignore the obnoxious duo. He looks up and makes eye contact with one of the two, and the face he flashed them was not of admiration but one of pure annoyance. So how do they respond? They flash him, not a look, the same way groupies used to flash bands in the 80s and 90s to get some form of attention. So now my sister and I are trying our best not to pay attention to these two, when my sister finally taps the woman on the shoulder and tells her, "Hey, there are kids present here, look around you, that's not appropriate." Both of them pull up their shirts, and the daughter turns to my sister and says, "Shut up, fatty, you're just jealous because yours probably sagged down to your knees." Here's the thing, part of my sister's treatment included steroids. She ended up putting on a fair amount of weight, and it took her the longest time to get rid of it. At the time, she was still rather self-conscious, so this wannabe backstage Barbie, who again, is most certainly a minor, decided to take a dig at a young woman who just beat breast cancer for a second time. I think security could sense a potential fight coming on. That or they picked up on the fact that these two had become quite a nuisance. And maybe there was a chance the band said something. But before my sister could respond, a security guard in a yellow shirt made their way through the crowd and started asking these two to leave. They protested, acted like a couple of children, and had to be taken out of the venue forcefully by more than a couple of guards. They were gone, but the damage was done. The words from that girl hit my sister like a truck, and for the rest of the show, I could tell her enjoyment was gone. I would periodically look back over at her to see her looking away and wiping away tears. The band finished up a show that started out great but ended up getting ruined for us towards the end. I even thought about leaving, but my sister felt as if we probably wouldn't get this opportunity again. We get mostly country acts in this area. And so we finished to the end and waited in the venue while the crowds dispersed, so we would have an easier time getting to our car. We were able to park behind the venue in a little parking lot we'd gotten there early enough in order to stand in line. Feeling as if our night was shot to hell, we made our way to my little Mazda, completely oblivious to our surroundings. But as I get a few feet away from my car, I hear a deep male voice behind me clear their throat and politely say, "Excuse me." I turn around and I realize I hadn't heard the rumble of the running bus engine in the back corner of the parking lot, next to the venue's exit door. Standing in front of us is one of those security guards, still wearing their yellow shirt, and he says to us, "You guys want to have a word with you." I look over to the tour bus, and the majority of the band is either standing outside or standing up on the bus steps. Daniel waves us over, and Ville starts talking to us like we're old friends. He asks my sister if she's okay, and let us know that he had seen us from the stage, and he could see she'd been crying after those two annoyances were ejected from the venue. The whole thing felt absolutely surreal to me, but then my sister pipes up in a nervous word vomit, telling him everything, and when I say everything, beating cancer, being surprised with the tickets, and how she felt as if her night was ruined by those two. The entire time the band just listened patiently. The band wasn't having that. This is when they all grouped together, with the exception of Gas, who the guys would explain was hurting pretty badly due to having a condition that would flare up every time he played drums. But as we would come to find out later, this wouldn't excuse him from this photo opportunity. My sister pulled out her iPhone, and the security guard pulled up the photo app. We all got together and made equally goofy faces as the phone flashed and the shutter clicked. Midge tapped my sister on the shoulder and told her to wait for a moment. The band came back 2 minutes later, if that, with a signed shirt. We ended up getting a group hug, and Ville patted me on the shoulder, telling me I was a good brother for sticking by her the way I had. He told my sister to keep being a fighter, and she said that this made her night. He corrected her by saying we made his night. The moment was incredibly wholesome and a core memory. It more than made up for the way the night ended. But that too was almost ruined by, you guessed it, those two idiots. "Oh, that's bull!" We hear the voice of an adult female screaming from the other end of the parking lot. I look up and sure enough they're standing by an older model Mercedes-Benz. "You'll snap photos with that cow and give them merch and hugs? My daughter and I were watching the whole thing. You were going to give my daughter an autograph before you leave." I look over at the band, and they're still standing there, stunned at the audacity of this woman. "Do what I told you I did at the Motley Crue show." Ville gasps and mockingly puts up his arms while waving his hands back and forth, saying, "Ooh, Motley Crue," in a playful whisper. Suddenly, the daughter pulls down her top once again and flashes the band for a second time, with her mother joining suit. Ville looks at them and cocks an eyebrow, in the most nonplussed voice says, "I've been at this for a while, and I can honestly say I've seen better." I couldn't help it. I laughed so damn hard I almost had a stroke. Daniel tapped the security guard on the shoulder and nodded his head towards the two, as if he was telling them, make them get in the car and leave. After that, they turned around and got back on the bus. Before the bus doors closed, I yell out, "And this is why we love you guys." And yes, to see a man I consider a hero to this day smile the way he did as those tour bus doors closed and wave goodbye to us was a perfect capper to the night. The gruesome twosome got back in their car and drove off, speeding out of the parking lot like the venue was about to blow up after security threatened to call the police. Say what you will, but at least the threat of law enforcement got through to them. So as I'm sitting here and reminiscing over the picture, I pull out the remaining photo albums, and I find that t-shirt. I know for a fact that I'm going to have these things framed in memory of my sister, and I've got the perfect spot on my living room wall. Part of me wants to get in contact with the band, even though that incarnation broke up around 2017. Still, part of me wonders if they would even remember the encounter, let alone who we were. But I will say this much. I will be a fan of the heartogram until the day I eventually shuffle off this mortal coil. You guys made a girl who went through so much throughout her life smile in a way I hadn't seen since. and more music artists, especially a good portion of the American ones, could take a cue from how classy you were that night. I miss you, sis. But this picture will forever be a reminder of one of the best and worst nights of our lives. 4. Let me take you back to the summer of 1996. Love You to Death by Type O Negative is all over the airwaves. Tourist season is in full swing, and I am the only goth guy volunteering with a church group at a special event because a good portion of the guys here are my friends. The event in question, the Special Olympics. I decided to volunteer my time as an assistant because frankly it seemed like a great idea at the time. My stepsister has cerebral palsy, as well as an underdeveloped heart at birth, and so working with those who had special needs was old hat for me by the time I was doing this. At this period of my life, I was 16 years old and still figuring things out, as you do. But I knew this was something I would love doing, even at my young age. So here I am, surrounded by a bunch of guys who looked like they would more than likely be categorized as preppy, and I am sticking out like a sore thumb, looking like a heavy-set member of Cold Chamber. Still, even though I wasn't a member of this church, the Special Olympics people were looking for as many volunteers, and regardless of my affiliation, the people running the event were more than happy to have me on board. The event was getting ready to begin, and I was paired up with a nice young man by the name of Mark. Upon meeting me, he paid what I consider to be possibly one of the best compliments I've ever received. He tousled my red mohawk haircut and told me I looked like the Animal, the best member of Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. So Mark, his mother, and I are heading to the first event, and I'm fairly certain it was a long jump. The whole way we're walking over there, Mark has a smile on his face that could light up a room, and he just keeps repeating, "Animal, animal," in a joking manner. His mother turns around and corrects him, saying there's a good chance I don't like him doing that, and I just turned to her and said, "It's okay, ma'am." And I point to my hanging mohawk. Didn't feel like standing in a field all day with hair glue in, and I jokingly continue, "He's observant, he's got me figured out." She and I have a good laugh, when a little to my left I hear, "Well then, I didn't know the freak show was in town." I knew the voice, I knew it well. I was honestly hoping I was wrong and it was just one of my friends making a playful jab at me. But my gut instinct won over, and who should I see? Justin. Justin was your typical preppy high schooler. He stunk of mom and dad's money, got miserable grades, yet somehow was still able to play on the basketball team. And he had the most punchable face and personality. Topping it off, whenever he wasn't on the court, he was usually dressed like he'd just walked off the set of those god-awful 90s boy band videos. This earned him the nickname Timberlake, especially since he had the bleach blonde wavy curl hair his namesake had at the time. I did my best to ignore him and just kept on walking, but his next comment got Mark's mother's attention. "I guess you're really among your people, huh?" he said while pointing with a cocky grin and a sarcastic little laugh. I watched as Mark's mother started turning red in the face. She kept looking at me and her son, and it was a combination of her fighting back tears and the urge to yell. Even though she was trying her best not to make a scene, her emotions got the better of her, and she would end up tactfully telling him off. Well, really, people like you're a dime a dozen, always giving my son a hard time. And you're going to call this young man who's taking time out of his day and being nothing but respectful towards my pride and joy, to call him a, what was it again? Oh yeah, freak show. You better start prepping yourself for a bright future pumping gas, because that's all you're ever going to amount to if you keep it up. Mark and I look at each other for a second before Mark chimes in, "Yeah, go be a jerk somewhere else, leave me and my friend alone," he says, gently placing a hand on my shoulder and displaying that all-too-contagious grin. Justin says, "Whatever," as he disappears into the crowd. But as these things have a way of playing out, this wasn't going to be the last time he tried anything stupid that day. I'm talking to Mark's mother as we watch him compete, and boy was he tearing it up, having the absolute time of his life, and let me say that if you were to look up videos of the Special Olympics and Special Olympians, that sense of sportsmanship is really there. It's truly uplifting to watch. I can't imagine how the participants feel, but I know how it made me feel just to be able to help out. But as Mark's mother and I are talking, I get curious and asked about his disability. I was respectful about it, so don't worry. She told me it was okay, as she sensed a slightly apologetic tone in my voice. She had no problems talking about it. If anything, she preferred people asked rather than made faces at her boy and treat him like he was less than. Mark was born a month and a half premature, breech with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck 2 times over. Due to oxygen deprivation, he was left with moderate brain damage. I would come to find out Mark was 17 years old, just about the same age as me at the time, but he functioned on the level of a 7-year-old at best. Also, he wasn't as brain damaged as most people assumed. Sure, he had a problem picking up on social cues, and there was a good chance he would need a caseworker to help him out long after his mother was gone. But he knew when people were being particularly cruel towards him. I'm really racking my brain trying to remember the mother's name, and I want to say it was Karen, but Karen would go on to tell me how hard it was to be a single mother raising a special needs child, and how events like this helped him to feel a semblance of normalcy. It still kills me to this day, a mother and child as kind as this struggling to feel normal because of preconceived notions and skewed perceptions. I want to say it was that day I stopped caring whenever somebody took a jab at the way I dressed because, thanks to the change in perspective, I realized that I was a pretty normal guy who liked to look abnormal, and I was lucky enough to have both parents in the picture, and the perspective of knowing what it was like to have a special needs sibling. A big part of me saw them go through that as well, and I truly felt for her. But this was a time for happiness, a time for camaraderie. And once we got that serious discussion out of the way, we went right back to watching Mark have the time of his life. He came in 4th place, but that didn't matter to him. I watched as he walked about giving everybody hugs and celebrating with the other Olympians before he made his way back to us. He decided he needed to take a breather before the next, and I'd like to say last event. A relay race lay in wait for him, and he knew it was going to take a lot out of him, so he did the smart thing and began stretching. As he's doing this, I look towards the crowd, and there again is Justin. He's watching the participants walk by, while sipping a big gulp. As soon as they have their backs completely turned to him, he's making mocking hand gestures and faces. How the event staff didn't pick up on this, I'll never know, but this is something I did not, should not, and will never stand for. I pointed this out to Karen and told her I was going to try and find event security. Now, I'm not sure about most of the other Special Olympics events, but I do remember this particular one had plenty of off-duty police officers and firefighters working event security. Big men with de-escalation training, and not the type of people you wanted to have catch you being downright disgusting towards people, especially differently abled people. It didn't take me long to find a security staffer, and I explained to him that one of my classmates was running around mocking the participants, and I offered up a brief description. Unfortunately, when the security guard followed me back to where Mark, his mother, and myself had been standing, well, he was long gone. I figured maybe he'd gotten his fill and left due to boredom. Maybe one of the other participants caught him in the act and gave him a well-deserved tongue-lashing. But yeah, that isn't how things played out. Stick around, because the events that would unfold played out far better than I could ever have expected. My sister is friends with a girl by the name of Carla. She has spina bifida, and she is confined to a wheelchair for the majority of the day. Back in the day, motorized wheelchairs were expensive and didn't have the best battery life. Timberlake comes out of the crowd once again, and by now he's openly pointing and laughing. People are finally starting to catch on, and I see parents and participants alike start looking like they're going to pound him into salt. I start making my way over to him, after getting a security guard. We're about 30 feet away when Carla and another girl in a motorized wheelchair start going towards him. The first girl goes past him and screams, "Move it or lose it, D-bag!" And he just stands there fixated on this girl, looking like he wants to say something. Due to this momentary distraction, he doesn't see Carla coming up on him, and what does she do? She parks her motorized wheelchair on his foot. He's screeching in pain and attempting to pull his foot out from under the wheel. The whole while, Carla is just apologizing to him and telling him her battery must have died. I look over at the security guard, and we're fully aware of the fact that she's both giving him his comeuppance and playing him like a fiddle. And then he screams in her face, "Move your goddamn chair now, you stupid," and derogatory word we decided was not okay a little over 15 years ago, but starts with R. The security guard breathed through his nose in a way that told me he was fighting back so many different urges. He walks over to Carla and says, "Hey, sweetheart, let me help you with this." And he accidentally rocks the chair back and forth a couple of times, before eventually moving it off of Justin's foot. Justin falls to the ground screaming in pain, and the guard just lets him lay there for a second, before picking him up by his shirt collar and escorting him off the premises. We would come to find out not long after this absolute knob decided to get some sick entertainment, and his eventual comeuppance that the wheelchair had in fact broken every toe in that foot, with the exception of his big toe. It took a couple of months to heal because there isn't much you can do about a broken toe, let alone 4 of them. And by the time they had, school's first semester was already in full swing. After that incident started to go around the campus, Justin earned a new nickname: Limp Bizkit. But here's the thing. I hear so many of these stories where the D-bag doesn't learn from their mistakes, and they continue on well into adulthood making others miserable. I'm surprised to say this didn't happen with Justin. A little over a year after graduating, a mutual friend of my sister and I had enlisted in the Air Force, and they were getting ready to leave. Before doing so, they were throwing a massive going-away party. Most of my graduating class was there, and they were having a great time. I'm walking around catching up with people I hadn't seen over the past few months, when out of the crowd steps this guy with a shaved head. He's wearing a pair of ridiculously baggy JNCO jeans, a blue-white ringer-style t-shirt, and a poker hat. It takes me a minute to realize that I'm looking at Justin, and he completely changed up his look. He walks up to me, giving me a kind of sheepish wave, and I don't know what to expect, if anything. I have expected him to sucker punch me, because that was the reputation I was used to. To say I was surprised when he actually asked politely if he could talk to me would have been the understatement of the century. I humored him, and we walked among the crowd, and he told me that he'd been doing his best to better himself as a person throughout the last year. He told me that being stuck walking with a limp and being compared to Fred Durst for the entirety of his senior year was enough to wake him up to just how disliked he was. He told me that he knew it was no excuse, but his parents were particularly cold and demanding people, so he would lash out at others because he couldn't do that at home. We eventually made my way back to my sister, and he did the most stand-up thing I've ever seen him do. He walked right up to her and apologized for the way he'd been acting that day. He let us know that he'd been on an apology tour of sorts since graduating, and he was even planning on volunteering at the next Special Olympics event, because he felt having a better understanding of what these athletes and their families were going through on a day-to-day basis would help him move forward with his betterment. And I'm happy to say he followed through. I moved away and went to college, but I still visited home whenever I had break. Every now and again, I would run into Justin, and he honestly seemed to be getting better and better. Remember Vine? He made it a point to make an account so he could try his best at motivating people to do better, without pulling any punches. Explained his story, and how much he hated himself back in the day. We follow each other in social media. I wouldn't say we were best friends or anything, but I get the occasional urge to see if he's still doing well, and yes, he is. Happily married, 2 kids, managing a marina, and sticking to his guns. Though it doesn't happen often enough, it was truly refreshing to see him learn from his mistakes and grow up. But it's a shame it took a broken foot and a comparison to Fred Durst in order to do so. Honestly, who in the hell wants to be compared to him? 5. In 2021, I was injured on the job to the point where I needed 2 back surgeries just to be able to walk without a cane and a back brace. To make a long story short, I was on an evening patrol when my then partner and I got a call about a fight at a house party. 2 incredibly burly dudes were having a knockdown, drag-out fight on the front lawn, and when I went to go separate them, I ended up falling backwards after being pushed. I landed on a granite block along a walkway leading up to the house, and it shifted 3 discs in my lower back. It killed me because despite the less than optimal pay and the nightly headaches after seeing some of the more horrific things life has to offer, I still enjoyed being a police officer. I came from a family of officers. My great-grandfather, grandfather, and father all served on the one police force or another, everywhere from local to state. Deep down, despite everything that has been coming to light about less than reputable police forces these days, I still felt a sense of community. Honestly, I lived for the phone calls that was for something as simple as an elderly neighbor getting confused, because they thought that Halloween decoration the neighbor had set up in the yard across the street was somebody gazing through their window. It happened twice during my 5 years on the force. Or that one time a 7-year-old couldn't remember the number for 911 when her dad passed out in the kitchen, but thankfully her mother thought ahead and wrote the actual phone numbers for the police and fire department in a whiteboard on her refrigerator door. As scared as that poor child was, she knew to call at least one of those two numbers, and I was the responding officer. Thanks to his daughter, that man got to live another day, after experiencing a pretty major heart attack. But then we got to people like the person who is the subject of my story. I got called to a local Target superstore on a drunken, disorderly shoplifter. Now, I don't know about all of them, but this location has 4 spots in the parking lot right by the main entrance specifically for police parking. I pull up in order to take care of business as I normally would, and when I get out of my unmarked squad car, I realize I'm about 3 in over the line. At the time, all I knew was that somebody who was described as being heavily intoxicated, who attempted to shoplift a good couple of $100 worth of electronics equipment. I go into the store, and I'm dealing with this drunk and belligerent 30-something guy, who, if I'm being honest, was probably seeing 2 of me. The fact that he managed to smash open one of the glass door cases in the back and stuff a whole bunch of Nintendo Switch games down his sweatpants as if nobody was looking at the situation he quite obviously created was actually pretty impressive. He more than likely would have gotten out of the store before I arrived, had he been able to walk straight. And so I go through the usual process of booking, cuffing, and reading his Miranda rights before taking him out of the store. I load him into the back of my cruiser via the back passenger door and radio dispatch to let him know I'm on my way, but as I get around to my driver's side door, I see this candy apple green Jeep Wrangler parked in a space specifically for police cars, complete with a sign informing customers of such. And the driver is parked so close to my door there's maybe a 4-inch gap between our cars. Needless to say, there was no way I was getting into my vehicle through the driver's side door, and crawling through the passenger side? Forget it. My dash-mounted computer jutted out so far there was no way I was going to just squeeze my way past it. So I was forced to sit in the passenger side of my car, and wait for another officer to show up long enough to keep eyes on my car, so I could have customer service page the driver of that vehicle in order to move their car. I was willing to let them off with a warning. After all, it wouldn't be the first time somebody was in a rush and they grabbed the first parking spot they saw. I was willing to do that until I momentarily gazed through my windshield and saw a little white card carefully placed between the glass and the wiper. Okay, I say to myself, wondering if some of the churches in the area suddenly became more brazen. I get out of the vehicle and grab the card from behind my windshield wiper, and immediately start chuckling to myself out loud the moment I read it. "Congratulations, you park like an a-hole," it reads. Now I'm really curious. The thing about an unmarked car is that it looks like one from a distance, but as closely parked as this person was, how did they miss the telltale signs? From the quite obviously mounted computer, to the flashers in the windshield and front bumper, all the evidence was there, and yet they somehow felt like it was a good idea to place this oh so covertly on the obvious police car. I radio dispatch and explained the situation, while leaving the whole card out because I wanted the other officers to see this. I was fairly certain they would get as much of a laugh out of it as I would. And as I theorized, the 2 other officers were almost in tears laughing so hard at the situation, partly because it was so funny and partly because of the fact they couldn't believe that somebody was so, I don't want to say stupid, so let's just say dangerously overconfident and naive, that this somehow felt as if it were a good idea. So my fellow boys in blue stayed put while I went to the customer service counter and waited for them to page whoever it was that drove the vehicle with the matching license plate. I thank them and make my way back to my car. As I'm waiting, I'm chatting with the other 2 officers, and my drunken perp is in the back seat getting more and more impatient. He's resting his face against the window, and he's yelling at me. I won't lie and say that I couldn't make out what he was screaming, but I won't repeat it here either. Let's just say it was disgusting and getting worse by the moment. The other officers offered to take him in for me, but I told them it was fine. I don't think this person would take too long now, that they knew their vehicle needed to be moved, and I was right. Walking out of the Target comes this 20-something blonde woman wearing a yoga outfit. The pants, the stereotypical jacket, the white trainer shoes, blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail, and a scowl. She makes her way over to the Jeep, and she's staring a hole through me. I very politely tell her, "Ma'am, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the place where you parked your vehicle is specifically reserved for police vehicles. I'm going to let you off with a warning this time, but I'll have to ticket you if you park here again." I say nothing about the card at that point. I just want to get in my cruiser and get this guy back to the station because by now he's spitting on the window. As I'm telling her this, she's opening her car door and getting ready to enter her vehicle. But as soon as I finish my statement, she slams the door and goes rigid.
"Excuse me? I don't know what you're telling me, but that sign clearly says it's parking for expecting mothers, and I'm pregnant."
At first glance, she didn't appear to be showing. Frankly, she didn't appear to be pregnant at all. But in the off chance that she was in fact pregnant, she wasn't that far along, and she still was wrong about the space. I'm doing my best to hold it together because in the grand scheme of things, this wasn't the first Karen situation I dealt with, nor would it be the last. I sighed deeply before responding to her while pointing at the sign. "Parking reserved for the men and women of our local law enforcement agencies. Thank you for all you do." I made sure to read it aloud and slowly, before following up with, "Unless you have a badge and a squad car, you're not supposed to be parking here. I don't see either one of those. All I'm asking is you move your car so I can take this guy in." I half expected her to get the message after pointing out the obvious, but in typical entitled Karen archetype fashion, the nostrils flared, alabaster skin turned 2 shades of pink, and her sneer stretched into a snarl that almost made her look like the creature from Big Trouble in Little China. You know the one I'm talking about.
"Where do you get off? I told you I was pregnant.
I cut her off. And I read that sign to you. I pointed out the fact that you are in fact parked where you shouldn't be. And I don't see why it's such an issue for you to get in your vehicle and park back in one of the several empty spaces that are meant for you. I pointed out 3 of them in the process. Each of them would have added an additional 8 to 10 feet to her walk. It wasn't that far off. 2 of them were directly behind me to a handicap spot. If memory serves correct, both of those spaces were empty when I pulled in to begin with. But none of this registered with her. I finally gave her the ultimatum. "Ma'am, up until now I've been pretty patient. I told you I've got a suspect I have to bring in, and all I've been asking you to do is move your vehicle so I can get into mine. I don't know how hard it is for you to understand that. I will tell you if you keep raising your voice to me, I'll have no choice but to call for my backup that just left the parking lot. Unless you want to head down to the station in the back of that car, I suggest you get in yours and park elsewhere. This is the last time I'm asking you. If we keep pressing this issue any further, you will be arrested. Technically, at this point, you're committing obstruction." It seemed to click for a minute, and so she finally started walking over to her vehicle. She got behind the steering wheel and turned over her engine. As she backed out, she rolled down her passenger side window and looked at me dead in the face before calling me a penis wrinkle. I shot her a mock sneer, as if the insult hurt me deeply and made me angry. I then pulled out the card and showed it to her before saying, "Wait a second. I thought I was an a-hole. I can't be both, right?" She shut up right then and there and started frantically checking her mirror as she backed her Jeep out to completion and proceeded to not only drive away like she was going to park, she just flat out left. I could have reported her. I didn't. Why? Because at this point, the belligerent drunk guy in the back seat was attempting to kick out the back window, with weak kicks that were more than likely doing more damage to his ankles and the glass, but yeah. Took him in for processing. Made a random Karen feel like a clown that day. Just another day on the job. I really do miss it sometimes. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Idiots in the Wild, episode 179. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story you'd like to share yourself or any of the videos I do, just pop it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. That's on the screen for you right now. Same for any business inquiries, that's where you send them. Right, let's see. Don't think we have any other bits and bobs today. Nope, so let's move along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. Today's question is: glass, metal, or plastic when it comes to soft drinks? Do you have a preference? Speaking personally, I'll drink them out of anything, although I do generally prefer cans. Second to that would be a bottle. If it's like an old style cola, I do prefer it in a glass bottle. Plastic is acceptable, but it is not my preference. It's just, if it's all available, fine, that'll do. Let me know what you think in a comment below. And before we go, let's take a look at the answer of the day from a previous video. And today's answer comes from Idiots in the Wild, episode 178. And I think it was, how do you stay awake when you're feeling sleepy? And today's answer comes from, let's see. Julie Reap. I do love a nice hot cup of coffee, but my go-to is the Monster energy drinks. I've become absolutely addicted to the Juice Monsters, with Mango Loco being my absolute favorite. Pipeline Punch is almost a tie for favorite. People keep telling me my heart's going to explode from all the Monster I drink, but I'm 55 years old and have been drinking at least 2 a day for nearly a decade. Besides, we're all going to die someday. I may as well die happy. Thank you very much for your answer, Julie. You're probably fine with the 2 a day Monster. Personally speaking, in terms of my caffeine intake, I'll have either two of the small cans, like just a standard Red Bull size can, the 250ml, or I'll have one of the big cans, which is 500ml. And I think, is that 16 ounce in US sizes? If it's really, really hot weather, I might have the equivalent of like 3 cans of the small ones. I'm not the biggest fan of Monster. I do drink it sometimes, but what I do like is they do a line of drinks. It's made by the same company called Rain, and they do some really nice flavors. They do a lemon one I'm quite fond of, but there's an orange one as well that's really good. In fact, all the ones I've tried in that range are good. I just have to be careful drinking them because, as I've mentioned before, my body is a little sensitive to sweeteners, so I can have them in small amounts, and some I can't have at all, but I do like the Rain. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off from now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.